This photo captures American Airlines Flight 191 seconds after takeoff from Chicago O'Hare Airport on May 25, 1979. The DC-10 is already banking hard to the left, with its left engine completely missing from the wing. The photographer had no idea they were documenting the final moments of 273 lives. Flight 191 was a regular afternoon from Chicago to Los Angeles. The McDonnell Douglas DC-10 had 258 passengers and 13 crew members aboard. Everything seemed routine as the plane accelerated down runway 32R just before 3 p.m. But as the aircraft rotated for takeoff at 159 knots, the entire left engine tore away from the ring, flipping up and over before crashing onto the runway behind them. The problem started 6 weeks earlier during maintenance at American Airlines facility in Tulsa. To save time and money, mechanics had been using a forklift to remove engines for service. Instead of detaching the engine from its pylon first, then removing the pylon from the wing separately like McDonnell Douglas recommended, they were taking the whole assembly off a single unit weighing 13,000 pounds. The forklift procedure had cracked the pylon's rear attachment point, a fracture that went unnoticed through multiple inspections. As Flight 191 lifted off, the weakened pylon finally gave way under the stress. When the engine separated, it didn't fall off cleanly. It ripped through the wing's leading edge, severing hydraulic lines and damaging the electrical systems. The left wing's leading edge slats, crucial for maintaining lift at low speeds, immediately retracted while the right wing stayed extended. This asymmetry was invisible to the pilots. Captain Walter Lux and First Officer James Dillard felt the thud but had no idea what had happened. Their training told them they were dealing with a simple engine failure, something any commercial pilot practices hundreds of times. The book said to climb to 800 feet, level off and assess the situation. Lux pulled back on the control column to maintain the proper climb speed of V2 plus 10 knots, exactly as procedures demanded. But with the left wing producing less lift than the right, following standard protocol was actually making things worse. The aircraft needed extra speed to stay airborne with a damaged wing, not the careful by-the-book speeds for a normal engine failure. As Lux held the prescribed speed, the left wing stalled. The D-10 rolled past 90 degrees, its nose dropping toward the ground. The cockpit voice recorder captured just 2 words from Captain Lux. "Damn it." The plane was only airborne for 31 seconds. It crashed into an open field near a trailer park about 4,600 feet past the end of the runway, killing everyone aboard instantly. 2 people on the ground also died when the wreckage destroyed several trailers. The investigation found that American Airlines wasn't alone in using the questionable forklift procedure. Continental Airlines had experienced a nearly identical pylon crack on one of their DC-10s, though they'd caught it before catastrophe struck. The FAA had already known about Continental's incident, but decided against an emergency directive to inspect all DC-10 pylons. After the crash, investigators discovered the design of the DC-10 slat system was particularly vulnerable. Most aircraft had mechanical locks that would hold the slats in position if hydraulics failed. The DC-10 relied entirely on hydraulic pressure. When Flight 191's engine tore through those hydraulic lines, nothing prevented the slats from retracting. The FAA grounded the entire DC-10 fleet for 5 weeks, while the modifications were made. Airlines had to inspect every pylon attachment point and redesign the maintenance procedures. McDonnell Douglas added locking mechanisms to prevent uncommanded slat retraction and improve the stall warning systems. This photograph, taken by an amateur spotter at O'Hare, became one of the most analysed images in aviation history. It shows the DC-10 at about 325 feet altitude, banking 112 degrees to the left, moments before impact. The missing engine is clearly visible, along with the aircraft's fatal left turn that the crew couldn't correct. The photographer later said they kept taking pictures, not comprehending what they were seeing until the fireball erupted in the distance. Flight 191 remains the deadliest aviation accident in the United States history. The crash led to significant changes in maintenance procedures, aircraft design requirements, and how the FAA communicates non-mechanical issues between airlines. All 271 people aboard were identified through dental records and personal effects. The oldest passenger was 81. The youngest was only 7 months old. This image shows a Volotea Airbus A319 on the taxiway at Milan Bergamo Airport on July 8, 2025. The plane was preparing to depart for Asturias in northern Spain with 154 passengers and 6 crew members on board. Outside the plane, you can see 3 men running towards it. The man closest to it in the dark jacket is 35-year-old Andrea Russo, and this image captures the final few seconds before a truly horrific incident. Russo wasn't a passenger, nor was the airport staff. Around 10:20 a.m. that morning, he drove the wrong way down an airport access road in his car. Security cameras would later show him abandoning the vehicle and running toward the terminal building. The builder from Calcinate managed to breach airport security through a door that led directly to the aircraft parking area. Airport personnel immediately noticed the intrusion. A security officer began chasing Russo across the tarmac, but couldn't catch up in time. The Voltaire flight had already completed boarding and was taxiing away from the gate when Russo sprinted towards it. Aircraft engines create what's known as a danger zone when they're running. The CFM56 engines on this particular A319 generate massive suction, with rotors spinning at nearly 15,000 rotations per minute. At taxi power, that suction extends several meters in front of the engine intake. Anyone who enters this zone risks being pulled in by forces they cannot resist. Witnesses said Russo ran directly toward the left engine. The moment he crossed into the danger zone, the suction took hold. Ground crew members who saw it happen immediately signaled the pilots to shut down the engines, but it was already too late. The entire incident lasted only a few seconds. The pilots had no idea what had happened until ground control radioed them to stop immediately. They shut down both engines and held position on the taxiway. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft within minutes. Passengers could see fire trucks and ambulances through their windows, but weren't told what had occurred. Some failed the response on their phone, confused about why their plane had stopped. Inside the cabin, flight attendants kept passengers calm while trying to get information from the cockpit. The crew told them there had been an incident on the ground, and they would need to return to the gate. It wasn't until passengers were back in the terminal that they learned someone had died. Milan Bergamo shut down all operations for nearly 2 hours. 8 departing flights were cancelled, arriving aircraft diverted to other airports including Bologna, Verona, and Milan Malpensa. Ryanair alone had to cancel 11 flights. The ripple effects lasted throughout the day as airlines scrambled to reposition aircraft and crews. Voltaire arranged psychological support for everyone on board. Several passengers later described hearing a thud, but not understanding what it meant until afterward. The airline had to bring in a replacement aircraft and crew for the rescheduled departure that afternoon. The original plane remained on the taxiway for hours, while investigators documented the scene. Italian prosecutor Maurizio Romanelli launched an investigation into how Russo managed to breach airport security so easily. The fact that he could drive the wrong way down an access road, abandon his vehicle, enter the terminal, find an unsecured door to the tarmac, and reach an active aircraft raised serious questions about security protocols at one of Italy's busiest airports. The investigation revealed Russo had no connection to aviation or the airport. He'd never worked there, and he had no friends or family employed there, and he had never shown any previous interest in aircraft. Whatever drove him to the airport that morning, he took those reasons with him. Bergamo Airport handles over 17 million passengers annually. After the incident, they reviewed all access points and security procedures. The door Russo used to reach the tarmac was supposed to be alarmed and monitored. Why those systems failed that moment became a central focus of the investigation. For the passengers on the Voltaire flight, what should have been a routine 2-hour flight to Spain became something they'll never forget. Several later said they wish they'd never learned what that thud meant, that some knowledge makes the world feel less safe. The image of the aircraft on the taxiway, captured just before Russo reached it, shows the last normal moment before 160 people's day changed forever. This photograph was taken inside Japan Airlines Flight 123 on August 12, 1985, showing passengers in their seats with oxygen masks deployed. Within minutes, a truly catastrophic event would take place, resulting in the complete destruction of this Boeing 747. The problems with this plane started 7 years earlier. In 1978, this same aircraft had suffered a tail strike during landing at Osaka Airport, scraping its rear fuselage along the runway. Boeing technicians were called in to repair the damaged rear pressure bulkhead, the dome-shaped structure that keeps the cabin pressurized. They were supposed to install a double plate with 2 rows of rivets. Instead, they used 2 separate splice plates that didn't overlap properly, leaving only a single row of rivets carrying the load where there should have been 2. For 7 years and over 12,000 flight cycles, that faulty repair held. Metal fatigue accumulated with each pressurization and depressurization, tiny cracks spreading through the weakest structure until August 12, 1985. Flight 123 took off from Tokyo's Haneda Airport at 6:12 p.m., bound for Osaka, with 509 passengers and 15 crew members. Many were families returning from Oban holiday visits. 12 minutes after takeoff, as the aircraft climbed through 24,000 feet, the compromised bulkhead finally failed. The explosive decompression blew off most of the vertical stabilizer and destroyed all 4 hydraulic systems that controlled the aircraft. Captain Masami Takahama, First Officer Yutaka Sasaki, and Flight Engineer Hiroshi Fukada found themselves flying a 747 with no functioning controls. They couldn't move the rudder, elevators, or ailerons. The only way to steer was by varying thrusts between the engines. The aircraft began flailing wildly, climbing and diving in 1,000-foot oscillations while slowly turning back towards Tokyo. Passengers had just enough time to write farewell notes. These notes, found in the wreckage, were later returned to the families. In this photo, you can see passengers wearing their oxygen masks incorrectly. Many had pulled them down, but hadn't placed them properly over their nose and mouths, likely because the flight attendants were too occupied helping others to demonstrate proper usage during the chaos. The masks themselves were only designed to work for about 12 minutes, meant for emergency descents that never happened, because the pilots couldn't control the aircraft's altitude. For 32 minutes, the crew fought to save the plane. The cockpit voice recorder captured their increasingly desperate attempts. They requested to return to Haneda, then try for Yokota Air Base, when that became impossible. Captain Takahama kept repeating "not good" as the aircraft became more uncontrollable. At one point, realizing they were losing altitude over mountains, he said, "This is the end." At 6:56 p.m., Flight 123's right wing clipped a ridge, sending the aircraft cartwheeling into the mountains. The impact was so violent that the 747 disintegrated, scattering wreckage across 2 ridges. Most passengers died instantly, but not all of them. When Japanese Self-Defense Force helicopters arrived at dawn, 14 hours after the crash, they found 4 survivors: 26-year-old flight attendant Yumi Ochiai, 34-year-old Hiroko Yoshizaki, and her 8-year-old daughter, Mikiko, and 12-year-old Keiko Kawakami. All 4 had been seated in the rear section, the only part of the plane that remained partially intact. Yumi Ochiai later testified that she heard children crying and people moaning through the night. She recalled hearing voices that gradually grew quieter until they stopped. Many passengers had survived the initial impact, only to die from their injuries during the cold mountain night while waiting for the rescue that didn't come until morning. The helicopter crews had actually spotted the wreckage the evening before, but were told to wait until daylight to attempt a rescue. The investigation revealed that Boeing knew their repair method was susceptible to fatigue cracking, but never issued a warning. Japan Airlines had also noticed the aircraft pulling to the right during flights, but hadn't investigated thoroughly. After the crash, Boeing changed their repair procedures and inspection requirements for pressure bulkheads worldwide. This photograph, taken by a passenger in those final minutes, was developed from film recovered at the crash site. It shows ordinary people in an extraordinary situation, some probably still believing the pilots would regain control. The image survived because it was protected inside a camera that was thrown clear during impact. Today, it's kept in the Japan Airlines Safety Promotion Center, a museum created specifically to ensure the lessons from Flight 123 are never forgotten. This image is taken from drone footage showing 26-year-old Juliana Marins sitting on a rocky slope about 300 meters below the main trail of Mount Rinjani in Indonesia. She's alive in this image, taken on June 21, 2025, just hours after she fell. Marins was a publicist from Brazil on a solo backpacking trip through Southeast Asia. She'd saved up for months to travel through the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia. Mount Rinjani, Indonesia's second highest volcano, was supposed to be one of the highlights of her journey. She joined a small group of 5 other hikers with a single guide named Ali Mustafa. Early that morning, around 6:30 a.m., Marins was struggling with exhaustion on the steep trail. According to her sister Mariana, who later pieced together what happened from other hikers in the group, Juliana asked the guide if she could stop and rest. Mustafa would later claim he only left her alone for 3 minutes. Other witnesses said it was over an hour. When Mustafa returned, Marins was gone. He spotted the beam of a flashlight far below the trail. She had lost her footing on the narrow path and tumbled down the mountainside. The other hikers could hear her screaming for help. She was conscious, moving, and by all accounts, initially survived the fall with minimal injuries. But this is where the story becomes infuriating. Drone operators managed to locate Marins quickly, capturing this footage that showed her sitting upright on the slope. She wasn't in the volcano's crater as some reports initially claimed, but on a steep ravine below the hiking trail. The terrain was difficult, but not impossible to navigate. Indonesian authorities told Marin's family and the Brazilian embassy that rescue teams would rescue her within 7 hours. That timeline came and went. Officials then claimed they'd already delivered food and water to Marins, information the Brazilian ambassador reported to her family. This turned out to be completely false. Nobody had reached her. The ambassador later admitted he'd passed on inaccurate information without verification. Weather conditions were cited as the main obstacle, particularly dense fog, but local mountaineers familiar with the area would later question these explanations. The rescue team of 48 people seemed to move with no real urgency, taking breaks, reassessing, and waiting for better conditions that never came. Meanwhile, Marin's family only learned about her accident through social media. A video of her predicament had gone viral in Brazil before anyone officially contacted them. They watched helplessly from thousands of miles away as Indonesian officials gave conflicting updates. First she was stable, then unreachable, then supposedly receiving aid, then lost in the fog. What the drone footage doesn't show is what happened next. At some point, between when this image was taken and when rescuers finally reached the area 4 days later, Marins fell again. Or perhaps she tried to climb and lost her grip. She also may have attempted to find her own way out when it became clear help wasn't coming fast enough. Her body was eventually found 600 meters below the trail, twice as far down as where she had initially fallen. The Indonesian coroner's reports stated she died from internal bleeding and multiple fractures, likely about 20 minutes after the trauma from the second fall. They ruled out hypothermia, finding no damage to her extremities. The estimated time of death was between 1 a.m. and 1 p.m. on June 25th. Her guide, Ali Mustafa, maintains he only left her for 3 minutes. He's currently being investigated by local police, along with a trekking company. The discrepancies in his timeline versus what other hikers reported remain unexplained. The question of why a professional guide would leave an exhausted hiker alone on a dangerous trail has never been adequately answered. Marins had written to her mother before the trip, saying she wasn't afraid of much, that she'd been raised by a woman who wasn't afraid to chase her dreams. The Brazilian government eventually paid to retrieve her body after President Lula changed federal policy specifically because of this case. Her family requested a second autopsy in Brazil, still seeking answers about why the rescue took so long. They've been vocal about what they see as negligence, posting that if rescuers had reached her within the promised timeframe, Juliana would still be alive. This image shows a young woman still alive, still savable, waiting for help that came too late. This photograph shows 3-year-old Scarlett Jensen and her 2-year-old brother Henry walking on a dirt road near their home in Old Town, Idaho. Their grandmother, Jamie Patton, took this photo at 4:47 p.m. on October 7, 2022. 5 minutes later, at 4:52 p.m., all 3 of them would become the victim of a violent tragedy. The family had spent the afternoon doing what countless families do on nice fall days. Jamie had taken her grandkids out for ice cream while their mother, Samantha Jensen, was out of town attending a friend's wedding. Their father, Lane, was at work. After the ice cream, they went for a walk near their home. When they got back to the property, Scarlett wanted to go out of the stroller to pick wildflowers growing along their private driveway. This wasn't a public road. The dirt path where they were walking was a pedestrian walkway that ran behind several homes, including theirs. It was essentially their backyard, a place where kids played regularly, where they should have been safe from traffic. Jamie let the kids out to explore while she supervised, taking this last photo as they wandered ahead of her. Dakota LeFontaine came tearing down that private drive in his 2000 Chevy Tahoe at 5:52 p.m. He was going fast enough that when he hit all 3 of them, his vehicle flipped over and landed on a nearby lawn. The impact killed Scarlett instantly. 2-year-old Henry was thrown with such force that he suffered 8 broken ribs, a broken jaw, a broken collarbone, a spinal fracture, a lacerated liver, bruised lungs, and severe road rash. Their grandmother Jamie suffered multiple broken bones. LaFontaine didn't stop to help. He ran from the overturned vehicle, leaving a dead child a critically injured toddler, and an injured grandmother on the ground. Bonner County Sheriff's deputies found him more than half a mile away from the scene, also injured from the crash. Henry was airlifted to Providence Sacred Heart Medical Center in Spokane, where he spent a week in the pediatric ICU. His mother had to stand there, watching her 2-year-old son fight for his life, while processing that her daughter was gone. The family had just welcomed their third child, a baby girl named Molly, just 2 months earlier. Samantha Jensen later said that initially, she couldn't even look at this photograph. Knowing what happened just moments after it was taken made it unbearable. LaFontaine was charged with vehicular manslaughter. The case dragged on for over a year, and he eventually pleaded guilty in January 2024. At his sentencing, the judge gave him the maximum sentence of 10 years in prison. During the sentencing, Samantha Jensen spoke directly to her daughter's killer for the first time. She told him about the little girl he killed, how Scarlett loved unicorns, the color pink, anything sparkly, and above all else, being a big sister. She talked about all the milestones she'd never see, such as her first day of kindergarten, her graduation, her wedding, and her own children. The prosecutor revealed during the trial that LaFontaine had been driving recklessly when he struck the family. This wasn't just an accident where someone made a mistake. He was speeding on a private pedestrian path where children were known to play, hit 3 people, and fled the scene. Henry survived his injuries. After 10 weeks in a full body brace and extensive recovery, he returned home. Jamie Patton recovered from her broken bones, but the family structure was forever altered. In interviews, Samantha Jensen says she's grateful for the photo now, even though it was agonizing to look at initially. It captures Scarlett in her last peaceful moments, happy and carefree, doing what 3-year-olds do, exploring the world around her with her little brother, supervised by their grandmother, in what should have been the safety of their own property. This image is from footage of Chileno Sanchez performing at the Salon Bugambilias in Culiacan, Mexico on May 15, 1992. As you can see, he's singing, while also being aware that someone in the audience has just handed him a piece of paper that's essentially signed his death warrant. Chileno had built his career on singing narcocorridos, ballads that told stories of drug traffickers, their victories, their deaths, and their vendettas. He wasn't just singing about this world from the outside, he'd been part of it. Before becoming a singer, he'd smuggled drugs and people across the border. He killed a man in Tijuana who allegedly raped his sister, and his own brother had been murdered when Chileno was 15. At the Salon Bugambilias, Chileno was midway through his set when someone from the audience approached the stage and handed him a note. Footage shows him reading it, his expression changing slightly before he crumples it up and continues performing. Those who were close to the stage said he looked rattled but kept singing. The contents of the notes had never been made public, though most assume it was a death threat. Chileno finished his performance around 2 a.m. He left the venue with his cousin Carmelo Felix and several members of his entourage in a Chevrolet Suburban. According to witnesses, they were stopped by men claiming to be state police officers, driving unmarked cars. The men said they wanted to talk to Chileno. His companions were told to continue on their way, while Chileno went with these supposed officers. The next morning, farmers found his body beside an irrigation canal near the town of Los Laureles. His hands were tied behind his back, and he'd been shot twice in the back of his head, execution style. The Chevrolet Suburban he'd been taken in was found burned out in a different location. The investigation into his murder went nowhere. Mexican authorities claimed they pursued leads, but found nothing concrete. No arrests have ever been made. This wasn't unusual for Sinaloa in 1992, especially when the victim was someone who sang about narcos and their enemies. The theories about who ordered the hit ranged from a drug cartel boss Chileno had offended with a song, to personal enemies from his smuggling days, to someone who simply didn't like what he represented. What made Chileno's death particularly chilling was how public the threat had been. Whoever wanted him dead had announced it in front of hundreds of people at his own concert, confident enough that nothing would come of it. They were right. The case remains officially unsolved over 30 years later. The video from that final performance has become legendary in Mexican music circles. At least 7 prominent narcocorrido artists have been murdered since Chileno's death, most in remarkably similar circumstances. His son, Aiden Chileno Sanchez, followed in his footsteps and became a successful singer of narcocorridos. In 2004, Aiden died in a car accident in Sinaloa at age 19. Some called it suspicious. Others said it was just another tragedy in a family that had seen too many. The Salon Bugambilias, where Chileno gave his last performance, still operates today. They don't advertise it as the place where Chileno Sanchez performed his final show. but everyone knows. This image shows Cellino doing what he did best, telling the stories of violent men to an audience that included some of those very same people. Somewhere in that crowd was someone who had already decided this would be his last performance. The no was just a courtesy, letting him know his time was up. And that's the end of the video, folks. I'd like to give a special thanks to all of my patrons for their support, especially those whose names you're seeing on the screen now, particularly Jalen Campbell, Kyle, BAN, John, Brendan O'Connell, Adam Clayton, Count Lagula, Danny Jade, Paul Mendoza, Squishy, Alex Christmas, Bella Schwartz, Brody Millers, Belsie Gell, Stimulate, Incris Desarius, and of course, Dick the Cock Johnson and the Woodmaster at WrestleMania X69 or maybe not dude. I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.